Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program tonight, American pharmaceutical giants Pfizer and Moderna are in talks with the government to supply their COVID-19 shots to the country, but the vaccine makers have reportedly sought indemnity. So far, India has not given any coronavirus vaccine manufacturer indemnity against the cost of compensation for any severe side effect. Pfizer has immunity in countries like the US, where it cannot be sued. Official sources have now indicated that the government is considering granting the concession to the two foreign vaccines. But the Pune-based Serum Institute of India, the world's largest vaccine manufacturer, has also sought indemnity, sources indicating to us that they believe that the rules should be the same for all. So the big topic that we're looking at this evening, our first topic, indemnity from lawsuits for all COVID vaccine makers. Is that the way forward? And later on the program, we have a very special guest. We'll be joined by the chairperson of the Wockhardt Group. There is a very big announcement for vaccines coming up in 2 weeks. It involves the Wockhardt Group. What is that all about? We'll be looking at that in a little while from now. But for starters, I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. Gagandeep Kang, professor at Christian Medical College in Vellore. Thanks very much, ma'am, for being with us. There is a lot to discuss. For starters, do you believe all companies looking to bring vaccines into India, particularly in the COVID scenario, need to be placed on a level playing field? Therefore, if indemnity is waived for some, it should be waived for all.
Yes, I do think that that should be the case. If you're giving indemnity to two companies, you should be offering it to every company that is offering those vaccines. It's also important to recognize that all of the vaccines that we are talking about at the moment are vaccines that are approved under emergency use or restricted use, meaning that they don't have full licensure as yet, even though Pfizer and Moderna have applied to the US FDA for a full licensure.
Dr. Kang, how does a citizen ensure that their rights are protected if they suffer from an adverse effect, if indemnity is to exist?
So this is a very interesting question. Now, we do have clarity for some issues of compensation. India is one of the few countries where we actually have a formula for calculation of compensation if injury is done during a clinical trial. So if you're participating in a clinical trial and something goes wrong, or with a drug or whatever else if it's a vaccine or a diagnostic, then the company is liable to pay compensation to the participant if the ethics committee and the regulator agree that it is the product that has resulted in that injury. This was formulated after the 2013-2014 discussions around clinical trials in India not looking after trial participants. Now we are in a situation where we are talking about vaccines that, as I mentioned earlier, are under restricted or emergency use, which means they aren't fully licensed. So the legal position on these, I guess, would be very unclear. In other countries, not in India, when you have a public health immunization program, or if vaccines are licensed to be used in the country, there is something called a no-fault compensation. In the US, for example, there is a vaccine injury compensation program, which is paid for by taxes that are imposed on every dose of vaccine that is sold, which means that essentially the government collects those taxes and the government pays out in case of an injury that occurs because of vaccination. We have no such program in India. It would be something that would be valuable for us for all of the national immunization program, not just for COVID vaccines.
Dr. Kang, what about medicines? And the reason I'm asking that is because there are a couple of medicines now for COVID which have been cleared for use in India, some say without as much rigor as people want. And therefore, is there not a concern that if we start this indemnity business, right, then we are also potentially clearing medication, even if it's an emergency now, which would normally not be cleared without a much more rigorous process?
So this is another gray area, because most of the medicines that you're talking about, the antivirals, the rheumatoid arthritis drugs
Yes.
that are being used for COVID, are drugs that were already licensed for another indication. And then, based on relatively small clinical trials that did not lead to clear outcomes, they were approved for use in COVID. So now, if they are used for COVID, prescribed by a doctor and approved by the regulator, who is responsible in case injury happens? I think there is a complete lack of clarity on that. But because they are licensed products, I'm not sure what compensation could or would be paid, because we use many licensed products that do have side effects that are known to happen.
Right.
And we do not pay out compensation when the drug side effect is known and predicted.
The other big decision which has been taken is emergency use, I beg your pardon, trials in India, end user trials, bridging trials. Those have been waived as well. So no bridging trials will be required now. Is there any reason for us to be concerned with that, or do we believe that the vaccines coming in now are robust enough based on tests abroad to be allowed here without these bridging trials?
Well, we had bridging trials for vaccines, and we have them usually for two reasons. One is to see whether there are any particular safety issues with those vaccines. And the second is really to look at immunogenicity and whether there is a difference in the response of the Indian population as compared to the response of a population in a different part of the world where the vaccine would have been evaluated. We don't usually evaluate vaccines for efficacy also in bridging studies. The argument that can be made in favor of doing away with the bridging studies is essentially that we have had these vaccines evaluated in large-scale clinical trials in other parts of the world. They have not shown safety concerns. And in terms of immunogenicity, because this is a completely new virus to which the whole world is naive, you should not be expecting a difference in immune response, unlike with other vaccines, where the environmental conditions that result in different levels of exposure might result in a difference in the immune response as well. So on those two grounds, and with the WHO recommending the principle of regulatory reliance, essentially saying that if the vaccines have been evaluated in large numbers in other parts of the world, please consider accepting them so that you do not delay access for your own population to these potentially very useful products. Based on all of that, I think it's acceptable in this situation to not have the bridging studies.
One final question. We are now thinking very seriously as a country, as a government, to waive indemnity, and bridging trials will not be required. But isn't this decision, assuming it happens, taking place after the horse has bolted? If we were going to do this, then why didn't we do it in, I don't know, January, and had many more vaccines come over here, because God only knows we never had enough vaccines.
Well, Pfizer had applied for approval in December, and one of the major reasons for asking Pfizer to do a trial at that time was to stick by the principles that had been put in place for all vaccines. In fact, the Drug Controller's Office had come out with an excellent document in September of 2020, laying out the regulatory pathway that would be followed for the licensure or approval of vaccines in India. It was an excellent document. And in January, a decision was made for this restricted use approval and the restricted use approval in clinical trial mode. So clearly a lot of things changed, and that would have been a good time to change the requirements for bridging trials as well.
Yeah, perhaps we never kept a pace of the changing reality on the ground, but hopefully the rules we now have will enable us to get closer to getting the vaccines we need. Perhaps we should have another discussion on whether we'll get to that target sooner than later. Thanks, ma'am, very much for being with us. Well, joining me now at this stage, Malini Aisola, the co-convener of the All India Drug Action Network. Malini has fought relentlessly for the rights of citizens who are involved in trials, for the rights of citizens who may have suffered adverse effects as well. And she joins us now. Thanks, Malini. So my first question is this. It is obviously an emergency. Everybody says that vaccines, the benefit of vaccines outweighs the risks. How do you assess that statement in light of what your work has been, which is to protect people who at one level receive medicines?
So, Vishnu, the discussion of indemnity is really coming up in the context of Pfizer, because the company is now, it seems prepared to provide around 5 crores, so that's about 50 million doses to India in the next few months. And this is really an offer that the government can't take lightly. And I think the government has also indicated that it is very close to giving in to this demand. In the current scenario, I think indemnity provides for risk protection to the companies that have, come up with vaccines that have been developed and approved at breakneck speed and been granted emergency authorizations. But this has to be coupled with also, on the other hand, protection of the vaccine recipients against any injury or harm or even death that might follow vaccination. So as we have come to understand, the decision is almost done, and it could be a deal breaker. If the government does not grant indemnity to Pfizer, it might walk away from the table. So that really puts the government in a very tough spot. But let's consider a few reasons why indemnity may not be a good idea. So for one, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has received hefty public funding through the German government and also pre-orders from the United States. And in its own revised estimates, Pfizer stands to make something like $26 billion in sales of the vaccine just this year. Secondly, in India, there are very few and weak avenues for vaccine recipients to actually pursue claims for compensation. It is not a litigious society at all, and the legal system again is not very favorable. So we wonder, what exactly is Pfizer worried about? Also, thirdly, it's a matter of timing. We know that the Supreme Court is currently seized of this matter. So would it be advisable for the government to be making such decisions at the moment? However, let's take the case that let's take for granted that the government is granting immunity. I would say that the first thing, that would be absolutely key is transparency, because there are reports of negotiations that Pfizer has done with other countries which are being covered under confidentiality agreements. And the public is really entitled to know what the terms of the indemnity are and what it would cover. So Pfizer has been known to ask for indemnity even against fraud, mismanagement, negligence. And there's no reason why the company should be indemnified against those willful acts or any sort of negligence. Secondly, why doesn't the government use this opportunity then to negotiate for tech transfer? Because the number of doses that would be coming to India are not very large. And we should probably move towards becoming self-reliant in being able to make these vaccines. From the point of view in indemnity, granting an indemnity also implies a shift of liability onto the government, if that's what we're moving towards. So the question then arises, what kind of protections would be available to vaccine recipients? And civil society and many experts have actually made this demand prior to the vaccination drive starting, that there should be a no-fault compensation mechanism put in place. So is there now going to be a compensation mechanism that is going to be set up? And until now, of course, there's no compensation mechanism for immunization. However, there are statutory provisions for clinical compensation of clinical trial participants.
Right.
And there is a formula by which clinical trial participants, are provided compensation.
Sure.
However, it is not on the basis of no fault. It is rather on the basis of causality assessment.
All right. Well, Malini, lots of key points over there. Let's just hope that whatever does come in is safe for so many people in our country. But thank you so much for raising those critical points as we look at the entire issue of indemnity holistically. Thanks very much indeed. Well, the focus on vaccines is going to continue, obviously, for a period of time, and certainly on programs that we here at NDTV look at. One of the groups which is likely to enter or announce a very major deal in just the next couple of weeks is WalkHard. I spoke to their chairperson earlier on today. Joining us now, a very special guest, one of the biggest names in pharma, not just in India but around the world, Dr. Habil Karakiwala. He's the founder chairperson of WalkHard. Thanks, sir, very much for being with us. The question is this: if the government of India is seriously considering an indemnity to Pfizer and Moderna now, what stopped them from actually considering this seriously a few months back? Because we are fighting against time to vaccinate as many people as possible.
I cannot comment why government did not consider earlier, because India has never given indemnity for vaccine all these years. But it is a practice in the United States and other Western countries for all vaccines to give indemnity waiver, because government takes a responsibility if there is side effects of vaccine. And this situation had come about 2 decades earlier, when vaccine research has gone down because of the indemnity problem. And then government take upon themselves to take that responsibility. And this is only exception for vaccine. This is not applicable to any other pharmaceutical product.
So, as I understand it, if this is given, who bears the responsibility in case something goes wrong? If there's an adverse reaction, will it, the company is protected, so therefore does the government pay out somebody if they go to court?
There is a system in the US, I'm not aware of other countries, that the vaccine manufacturers pay some amount as an insurance to government for every unit of vaccine they sell. And the US government has created a fund. And from this fund, if there is any liability, government will pay to individuals or the group of people. There is also a ceiling how much government will pay per vaccine. So I think there is a law there to both protect the manufacturers as well as the consumer.
There has to be one law. If there is indemnity given to some companies, then indemnity needs to be given to others as well, at least across vaccines. So therefore, if you've got a Serum Institute, the sources there indicating that, look, we're trying to bring in vaccines as well, but we need the same standards. Is that not a fair request?
I think it is a very fair request.
Now, let's talk a little bit about WalkHard itself and the fight against COVID. I believe you can really ramp up your production in order to manufacture vaccines here in India. Are you in talks with any of the vaccine makers at this stage to step up the numbers we need in India?
We are discussing with one company to manufacture 500 million doses of vaccine capacity per year. And we have already signed the technology transfer agreement. But we are in the process of signing the final agreement. And I think we will announce it as soon as it is done in the next few weeks.
Which company are you talking with, sir?
Because of confidentiality, I cannot mention the name of the company.
Is it one of the companies looking to enter India?
It is the company which is either approved, their products are approved, or in the process of getting it.
All right. What about some of the existing vaccines? For example, Bharat Biotech needs to step up manufacturing of Covaxin. Is that also something that you are looking at?
We are not looking at that, the Bharat Biotech vaccine, because it requires a special kind, three manufacturing facilities. And because in our biotechnology complex, that will disturb our other biologicals, and therefore we've decided not to have that.
Right.
But after that specific vaccine, we have the capacity to manufacture any other vaccine which is being marketed or developed worldwide. And we can deal with number of technologies like mRNA or protein-based or vector-based technology for vaccine.
So the vaccine which you hope to announce in the next 2 weeks or so, you believe that that would be an mRNA-based vaccine?
I cannot say at this point in time what would be the basis of that technology of the vaccine, but it will be one of the three.
All right. As you can appreciate, sir, it's my job to press you for an answer on this. But I understand that you know there are confidentiality clauses. But let me rephrase that by asking 500 million doses, you said. So in other words, Wockhardt in a finite period of time, if everything goes according to plan, will be adding to vaccine availability in our country by 500 million doses in how many months, sir?
This is annual capacity, and we will be starting production sometime in October. But actually, it will take us another couple of weeks to ramp up full production.
So by December, would this vaccine, whichever vaccine it is, be out in the market?
Yes, we see our arrangement is as a contract manufacturer arrangement with the principal innovator. So we would be supplying it to them, and then they would be, it is up to them to introduce a product in India or other countries.
And what about prices? Would this be competitively priced?
We have only a price agreement between us and them.
Right.
What price they will put is up to them actually.
All right. Well, sir, this is very good news, and I hope in 2 weeks from now the news will be even better when you actually tell us, you know, what is coming into India. We need vaccines so desperately to get to that approximately 2 billion dose mark by the end of the year. No one really knows how that's going to happen. In fact, that's my final question to you, sir. Realistically, no matter how hard somebody like you or Wockhardt tries, do you think we will get to that 2 billion dose mark which the government hopes to get to by the end of the year? How is that even going to happen?
I cannot comment on the government, but from the government obviously is in a close touch with the various manufacturers here. And they said they would be able to vaccinate about 1 crore people a month from July onwards. But even if there is some minor slippages, it will not be too much delayed, maybe a month, 2 months or so. And I think considering the size of population and the enormous task both government, vaccine manufacturer and delivery mechanism is having.
Right.
To deal, I think it is a great achievement to do it in this limited period of time.
All right, Dr. Habil Karakiwala, founder, chairperson of the Wockhardt Group. Thank you, sir, very much for being with us. Exciting times for new vaccines to be coming into the market. Hopefully, we'll have that big announcement from you very soon indeed. Thanks, sir. Thanks very much.
Pleasure talking to you.
Kerala has retained the top rank in the Niti Aayog Sustainable Development Goals Index for India 2020-2021, while Bihar has been adjudged as being the worst performer according to a report which has been released today. Now, the Index for Sustainable Development Goals, it's called SDGs, evaluates progress of states and union territories on social, economic and environmental parameters. So, let's just take a look at what we know at this juncture. Kerala has topped that list. Bihar has ranked last. This is the Niti Aayog, therefore the centre's own development rankings. So in terms of those states which have done well, states in the south have dominated the top 5. The north have brought up, states in the north have brought up the lowest 5. So at 66, India's score is actually up from 60 in 2019-2020. So just let's just take a look at this over here. It is an improvement from 2019-2020. Unfortunately, that division between the north and the south remains. The Niti Aayog releasing its Sustainable Development Goal rankings. Kerala has retained its top position. Chandigarh among UTs, Union Territories, is on top. As I mentioned, at 66, India's score is up from 60 in in 2019-2020. So let's give you a few more details of that. It is the Niti Aayog's report over here which has come out, the centre's development rankings. And again, there is that disparity between states in the north and the south, which is a concern. We're completely out of time on Left, Right and Centre this evening. From all of us here, goodbye.